today's press conference. We have the pleasure of having both Secretary Denis McDonough and Deputy Secretary Donald Remy joining us today. Before I turn the floor over to the Secretary, I want to share today's ground rules. To our media in person, ask that when the Q&A session begins, that when called upon to please step forward to the microphone and provide your name and organization. You are allotted time to ask 2 questions and an immediate follow-up to those questions if warranted. We will circle back to you at the end if you have any additional questions. To our media who are remote, I ask that you please use the raise your hand function in the WebEx. I will then open the floor to your questions. Remember to unmute and turn your camera on when speaking so we can hear and see you. Please all remember to mute once you are finished as well. You too will also receive the opportunity to ask 2 questions and immediate follow-ups if necessary. Thank you for following these ground rules, and since we have a lot of ground to cover, I now turn the floor over to Secretary Denis McDonough.
Great. Terrence, thank you very much. I find myself cleaning my glasses more often now. I think that's probably speaks to the weakness of my eyes, not the dirtiness of my lenses. Thank you all for joining us today. It's great to be with you in person. First off, and importantly, we're celebrating Women's History Month at VA by honoring the women veterans who have defended our freedom in every conflict since the Revolutionary War, and the women who are still defending our freedom across the world today. And I say to each woman veteran out there that we at VA see you, and we are here for you. We want you in our care. We want you to file for your benefits. So please visit our Center for Women Veterans at va.gov/womenvet. That's va.gov/womenvet to learn all about the care and services available to you. And if you have any questions about anything, you can email the Center for Women Veterans directly at 00w@va.gov. That's 00w@va.gov, and we'll get you the answers and the assistance you need, because at the end of the day, we work for you. Now, I've asked our fantastic Deputy Secretary, Donald Remy, to lead us off today, because as a part of our commitment to transparency here at VA, I want to make sure that you have complete access to the guy who's doing so much to help run this department. And it so happens that there's a lot of news right now. In fact, news on the issues he's the primary leader on. So it's a perfect month for him to join us. Thanks for being here, Donald, and thank you for all the great work. Over to you, my friend.
Secretary McDonough, thank you for allowing me to join you today and share the podium. Thank you for being here. This is such a terrific opportunity for me. It's 8 months for me on the job, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to engage with our community. Last week, VA had something of a homecoming when many of our employees who'd been working from home began to transition back into the office. Notice I didn't say back to work, because you all know that VA employees, they never left work when the pandemic hit. Nearly 80% of our people stayed right on the front lines, battling the pandemic in VA hospitals and national cemeteries, serving vets and their families. But we're welcoming back employees who worked from home the past couple of years, starting with our non-bargaining unit employees last week, and extending bargaining unit employees by May. To do it safely, to do it right, we listened to our people. We studied our lessons learned from the past 2 years. We worked closely with our national and local labor partners and shifted to a more hybrid work environment. We've dramatically increased telework opportunities in this new posture, and we'll continue increasing them because that flexibility means a lot. It means a lot to our great employees and the VA's ability to recruit and retain them. So we'll be transitioning to the future of work over the next several months. Establishing a new normal at VA that will help keep the best employees at VA, bring the best employees to VA, and most of all, make sure all of those employees are safe at VA. Because our employees, as the Secretary says often, are our number one asset. Next, I want to talk about the 2022 budget deal the President signed into law, which is great news for the veterans we serve, because it means VA can continue delivering the world-class timely care and benefits that our veterans deserve. The deal means VBA can do the important work needed to automate the processing of disability claims, further reducing claims backlog, and deliver over $150 billion in earned benefits to more than 6 million veterans, service members, survivors, and dependents. It means NCA can continue their fantastic work at existing cemeteries while funding the largest expansion of our cemetery system since the Civil War, empowering us to add new national cemeteries, increase the number of grave sites at existing cemeteries, and expand availability of cemeteries with state and tribal grant funding. And for VHA, it means we can continue delivering more care to more veterans than ever before. And it provides us with the largest year-over-year increase in recent history for our medical and prosthetic research in particular, allowing us to expand our understanding of a wide range of veterans' health concerns. Things like TBI, traumatic brain injury, and the impact of toxic exposure on veterans' long-term health outcomes. Finally, we've been saying repeatedly for the last several months that we needed Congress to pass the RAISE Act, our number one legislative priority. And with this omnibus, Congress delivered. The RAISE Act empowers us to invest in our employees and pay nurses and physicians assistants every penny they're worth, helping us recruit, retain, relocate our employees in this very competitive labor market. We've got a lot more to do. We've got a lot more to do to invest in our workforce. But this is a big step forward, and it'll make a real difference. So for all those reasons and more, we're very grateful to Congress and the President for their strong support of our veterans in this deal. Let me say a word on veterans caregivers. A lot of attention has been paid to our program. Secretary McDonough has consistently promised we will deliver on our commitment to caregivers of injured and elderly veterans. It's simple. Supporting caregivers improves outcomes for veterans. That's why we have dedicated staff at every VA medical center who stand ready to meet with caregivers along the way to help identify their needs and their veterans' needs and share plans to address those needs. Our caregiver support program, the program of comprehensive assistance for family caregivers, and the program of general caregiver support services, they're terrific tools to achieve that end. And you know that our dedicated professionals are working tirelessly to administer those programs. Last week, I want to share a story with you. In fact, I was in Chicago. I was visiting the Jesse Brown VA Medical Center there. And I had the privilege to hear from two veteran caregivers. One caregiver I met was the daughter of a veteran. He was in his 90s. The other was the spouse and caregiver of her husband, a Vietnam veteran, a two-time Purple Heart recipient. They're both participating in VA's program of comprehensive assistance for family caregivers, and their stories amplified to me how important this program is, how it helps vets age at home, how it helps vets age where they want to, how it can be a life changer, a lifesaver for caregivers, giving them the tools, the training, the resources, and support they need to care for their veterans. One of the caregivers said of her veteran, and this really moved me, she said, he served this country first, and now his country is serving him. He did what he had to do, and now his country is doing what it needs to do to help him and take care of him. That was particularly moving for me. That's our goal, and people like them. Stories like theirs, that's why we need to get this program right. Now, I know, and I've heard it over and over again, many veterans, stakeholders have been concerned about the program recently. You heard the Secretary talk about this at the last press conference and how we were digging deeply into those issues. We know that there are concerns specifically about the acceptance rate and our legacy reassessments as well. So let me say to all of them, to anyone with concerns about supporting veterans, that is our top priority, to support those veterans. We hear those concerns, and we're working diligently to address them. And we'll continue to make sure that veterans and their caregivers get the support they need, the support they deserve. That means we have to make sound, correct decisions that are in the veteran's best interests. That means we must have consistent, reliable, and understandable rationale for the decisions that we make, and clear next steps for the veterans if they choose to appeal a decision they disagree with. That means we must keep this simple for our veterans and their caregivers so that they can get the care and resources they need. And most importantly, and consistent with the intent and the direction in the Mission Act and the expectations of those we serve, that means we must continue to expand the program so we can take care of the caregivers who need us most. Now, we committed to completing the legacy applicants and participant reassessments by October 2022. However, as we've completed those reassessments, and it's become evident that there were some unintended consequences in the way that the regulations were written. And while 28% of new applicants are approved, there are veterans with moderate to severe caregiving needs who are unable to be admitted into the program or remain in the program as the regulations currently are written, meaning a vast majority of the decisions exclude veterans and caregivers from the program. That's simply not what we want. That's not what the veterans and caregivers need from us. The Caregiver Support Program leadership and their staff, they've been working diligently over the last 17 months to implement the current eligibility criteria. I get that. And we've tried to get to yes whenever we can, and to err on the side of the veteran and the caregiver when rendering decisions along the way. But we also recognize that the regulations, they may need to be revisited to ensure they can be implemented as originally intended. And while the program has made tremendous improvements in reduced processing times and enhanced the clinical support within the program, we recognize that there are a multitude of limitations that hinder our efforts to ensure that veterans and caregivers get the benefits they need through the program of comprehensive assistance. As the Secretary has made clear, we can and we need to do more, and we're going to do more. We've taken feedback from the program office, from Congress, from the VSOs, from veterans, from caregivers, from all of our stakeholders, all of our force multipliers, and we're re-examining our approach. While additional work will be done, we are going to do a few things here. We are, as promised, going to expand the program to veterans of all service eras, on October 1, 2022. We're going to complete those legacy reassessments. And based on those evaluations, any caregiver eligible for an increase in caregiver benefits will receive that increase. And let me be clear, especially clear about this point. We will not, I repeat, we will not remove anyone from the program or decrease any support before we re-examine our current eligibility criteria. And if necessary, we'll consider making changes to those criteria. We're going to reassess this caregiver program eligibility criteria because we must do that. And we're going to continue to gather feedback from all of our stakeholders. We're going to have a stakeholder engagement so we can share with the VSOs, with the caregivers, with the Congress, with veterans, with all of our stakeholders what our plans are moving forward and gain their insight, continued insight and their feedback. We're going to use a human-centered design and customer experience survey. We've done this in the past, and data that we get and that we collect so that we can improve the veteran and caregiver experiences. Now, I know that's a lot, but it's only a start. There's much more we can do to build on these first steps, and we're going to do it. We will continue to work tirelessly, stopping at nothing, to make sure vets and their caregivers get all the support that they need. Now, lastly and quickly, a word on VA's electronic health record modernization effort. And then we'll go to questions, and I know you'll have many. Many have raised questions about the recent IG reports that were issued, and there's a recognition that we have a plan to go live at Walla Walla. We're looking forward to that go live at Walla Walla on Saturday. We believe we're armed with the right tools to remediate the challenges as we transition from VISTA to the new EHR solution. All healthcare record transitions are complex. There's no doubt about it. They're prone to hiccups along the way. Ours is no exception. And last week's OIG report, and I thank the OIG for looking into these issues and sharing the report, it highlighted some of those challenges. None of them surprised us. These were issues that were identified previously, and we're working to make sure that each and every one of them is resolved. Many of them have already been resolved. Everything we're doing is shaped by the lessons we've learned since Go Live at Spokane, and lessons that we keep learning along the way, because veterans have earned and deserve our very best, and will never settle for anything less. Sir, that's all I've got. I know that there are lots of questions, so I'll turn it back over to you, Terrence, and let's get started.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary. Floor is open to questions. Leo Shane.
Yes, hi. Thank you both so much for doing this. Questions about the caregiver change here. What will that new review entail? Is there a timeline for when we should expect that new eligibility criteria, and will it be similar to the past process here?
Thanks. Great question, Leo, and I appreciate it. The answer is it's going to take as long as it takes to get it right. We are going to work through these eligibility criteria and make sure that we have it structured in a way that it can be effective, that it can be efficient, that we can deliver on our commitments. I can't give you an exact time frame. It could take a year. It could take longer than a year, but we're going to go through the process to make sure that our eligibility criteria are consistent with the intent of the law.
And I know a lot of families who said they were going to be removed from the program were pretty upset about this, pretty upset about how the whole process worked. What do you say to them that this is not going to be the same process, just delayed again, that they won't be seeing the same headaches and the same heartaches in a year or 2 years?
We've learned, and this is not the first time that we've stepped back and re-examined our process here, particularly for the legacy reassessment. You know that. And we've learned from mistakes that we've made in the past, and we're looking at how we can make sure we don't repeat those mistakes. So this will look different, it will feel different, and the result will be different for those caregivers and those veterans.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leo.
Eric.
Thank you. You talked about, Deputy Secretary, you talked about the new hybrid work environment. I was wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail of what that will look like, who it applies to. Do employees only have to come in a certain number of days per week, or does it vary case by case?
Great question. As you can imagine, we get that question a lot from our team, from our staff, and the hybrid work environment will allow for people to use telework arrangements so that they only have to come into the office a set number of days during the week. We'll create a structure that assures that we're getting the work done as we have through the entire pandemic. A lot of people have been working remotely during that time period, and we've learned that we can be successful in that environment. So the hybrid environment will be an environment where some people will be in the office, some people will be teleworking.
If I could shift to a different subject, you put out the Air Commission recommendations. I wanted to ask, you talked, Mr. Secretary, about there being a net increase in employees at the end of this potentially, and I know it's years away, but what about the employees who are working at facilities slated for closure? What options would you envision being available to them? Are they going to be given some sort of retention incentives, relocation incentives? What do you see happening there?
That's a great question. And look, one of the things we've really prioritized, and you heard Donald talk about it today, and obviously we laid out as it related to the president signing the omnibus last week and the omnibus carrying the RAISE Act, which is one of the 10 steps that we outlined from Charleston in January when we talked about our human resource investment plan. So the first and most important thing is we want our workforce to understand exactly what Donald said today, which is they are our number one asset as we care for veterans, one. Two, there is a long road from here to enactment of the Air Commission recommendations. We have a lot of work to do between now and then. And that's why and that's the message we underscored and why we made it a priority to talk to our workforce first before making sure that all these recommendations were out in the Federal Register for everybody to see. We wanted to make sure that our workforce understands that this is a plan to invest in the kind of facilities that they ought to be working in the kind of circumstances they ought to be working under, rather than working in really old facilities, some of them, as much as 100 years old. So that's the second thing, which is I want to make sure our team understands that the Air Commission recommendations are as much an investment in our workforce as they are an investment in our ability to care for our vets, because we need updated facilities to do both of those things. Third, you ask about potential retention bonuses and stuff like that. We are constantly assessing what we need to maintain the world's best healthcare workforce, which is what we have. We will continue to work that. That's why we laid out the 10-point plan in January. That's why we went and got this additional authority on the RAISE Act in Congress. But let's also remember that changes envisioned in the recommendations are decades away. And so in the meantime, let's make sure that we stay focused on priority number one, which is timely access to world-class healthcare, and we'll keep investing in our workforce to do that.
So your message to someone who sees this recommendation and says, my clinic or my hospital is being recommended for closure is, don't worry about it yet?
Our recommendation is, my message to them is, you are our number one asset in caring for veterans. We are undertaking a multifaceted effort to invest in you and our ability to care for veterans. The Air Commission recommendations are one part of that, but right now they're a part of that are years away. There are a series of steps, including the future of work plan that the Secretary just talked about, including the RAISE Act that the President signed last week, including our effort to invest in the workforce as we saw over the course of the pandemic, including our ability to get HR modernization, for example, up to snuff. Each of these are steps that we're taking and will continue to take.
Thank you very much. Rebecca?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. RebeccaKeelMilitary.com. On the Caregiver program, what, if any, specific areas of the eligibility criteria do you think are causing these, in your words, unintended consequences, and what do you think might possibly change with this review?
So thank you, Rebecca. I really appreciate that question. It's, I think, too early to identify a specific portion of the eligibility criteria. We're looking at this holistically. we're going to examine each of the criteria to determine whether or not they are designed to meet the intent of the statute. Taken as a whole, what we've seen is far too many people are being told that they're not eligible for the program. And so we want to understand which of the criteria, or whether or not taken as a whole, the criteria have put us in that position. But I don't want to here today identify any specific criteria as the one or the ones that have created this challenge for us.
And then on a separate topic, you mentioned the go live at Walla Walla for the electronic health records. Obviously, there have been some lawmakers, particularly from Washington, calling for you to stop. Have you talked to them and addressed their concerns?
We've tried to be in contact with all of our constituents, including the lawmakers in Washington, and keep them abreast as we move forward with our plans to go live at Walla Walla, sharing with them information that we have and challenges that have presented along the way and successes to overcome those challenges.
Thank you.
Ellen.
Good afternoon, Ellen
Hi, Ellen.
Milheiser, Synopsis. I love the, sorry, I don't mean to be scary. I don't mean to be scary. You sort of get a
We're
scared
not
look.
scared of you.
I'm glad.
We're not afraid of you.
Back
We
to the
admire
air
you.
commission.
We respect you.
Oh, thank you. Back to
Only
the air
fear you
commission
will.
report. Back to the air commission report.
Sure.
I'm fascinated by the complementary strategy. And there are a lot of things in there that I'm wondering, they sound like some of them are already underway and some could be implemented soon. And I'm wondering how many of those things are going to go on even while we wait for the air commissioners to be confirmed
Yeah.
and for them to meet.
Yeah.
And these are things like, there are a couple of provisions to have people telework to make space in clinical places, and the creation of the Atlas sites in California.
Mm-hmm.
So are those things going to continue even while we wait for the commission to stand up?
Yeah, you know, the statute itself, in fact, requires that we continue our infrastructure investments, requires that we continue our modernization efforts. And we have a process in place, the SKIP process, that allows us to do that. And, you know, so for example, I was thrilled to be able to provide remarks virtually to an opening of a new CBOC in Bozeman, Montana, last week. Beautiful facility, named after a remarkable veteran, and whose family continues to do remarkable work for Montana vets. And so we're going to continue to do that, and we're going to continue to execute on that. It's difficult to disaggregate, you know, existing plans from the more anticipated plans, but we'll continue to work with Congress and make sure that they're up to date on our existing plans through the SKIP process. But this is, I mean, there's the confluence of these two things creates a lot of, has the potential to create some misunderstanding. Take the cost, for example. You know, to operate our healthcare facilities over the course of the next 30 years will be about, this is the status quo, about $1.8 trillion just to operate. So there's been people saying, hey, this plan costs, you know, over $2 trillion. Well, even if we were to maintain the status quo, capital costs plus operating costs over the next 3 decades is about $2 trillion. The Air Commission plan anticipates operating costs slightly lower, by the way, than operating costs under the existing antiquated system, as well as the capital costs, about $2 trillion. So it's net, same cost. So the question is, over time, how do we ensure best care and best facilities closest to veterans? That's what this plan outlines.
To switch topics a little bit,
Please.
back to the EHR.
Yeah.
Lawmakers on the Hill frequently reference the survey of Spokane employees showing a lot of problems with morale. Have y'all gone back in and, you know, after that survey, you seem to do a lot for training. Have you gone back in and done another survey to see what the current status of morale is?
Thank you for that question, Ellen. And this is a daily exercise of gauging the morale, the focus, just the engagement, I should say, of the team in Spokane. We speak to the leadership regularly. We speak to the staff. I've participated in a virtual town hall meeting. Dr. Terry Adirham, our new program executive, has participated in the town hall. We plan to go out there and visit the site in person. We understand and we hear the concerns that are expressed by the staff. You got to remember, they were asked to do something Herculean, roll out a new electronic health record in the middle of a pandemic. And so that environment presented challenges that were unique to the moment, and we understand what they are. The great thing about the feedback that we've received from Spokane is it's clearly a component of a high reliability organization. They provide feedback. We understand what those challenges are. We take action to respond to that feedback. We incorporate lessons learned into our move forward plan, and at the same time, we stay engaged with the team in Spokane. So in your question around a formal survey, we haven't conducted a formal survey, but we have engaged with the team there, and we're continuing to engage with them to understand the challenges that they may continue to have and to keep their morale up. Thanks, Ellen.
Orion.
Orion Donovan Smith with the Spokesman Review. Thank you both for doing this. I'm going to have a couple questions also on the EHR. So first, with Spokane, as you know, Mr. Remy, you said there have been some hiccups, but looking at the language the OIG used, called those serious deficiencies that have caused problems for clinicians in providing care. So I guess my first question is just, what does the timeline look like for resolving those? I think the majority of the problems identified were not resolved yet. What does the timeline look like for resolving them, and what would success look like in Spokane?
Yeah, thank you, Orion, and I appreciate your question. And just as clarification, I wasn't meaning to suggest that the issues that were presented in Spokane were just hiccups. When I referenced hiccups, I was saying anytime you roll out an electronic health system, you're going to have hiccups along the way. I recognize the challenges that were presented in Spokane were real challenges. And these are issues that were identified to the IG. Some of them were issues that we identified ourselves. Some of them were issues that I heard directly from the team there. And we have put in place plans to remediate and resolve those issues that were presented. Many of them actually have already been resolved, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop there. I know the IG report, when you think about it, talked about issues that were presented to the IG that occurred between January and June of 2021. We've been working tirelessly to make sure that we resolve them there and we don't have them replicate anywhere else. And so we're keenly focused on making that happen and making sure that as we continue to roll out this electronic health record, we do it in a manner that takes care of the safety of the patients we serve and that provides the tools to our clinicians to properly care for those patients.
And just quickly, you mentioned you're planning a visit to Spokane. Can you tell me anything about that?
I promised them when I did the virtual visit I was going to be there in person, but unfortunately the weather in your lovely state denied me that opportunity. I promised that I'd come out in person, and so we're trying to make sure that we get schedules so that I can come out and visit face-to-face with the folks that I talk to over Teams.
And then on Walla Walla, I understand, as we saw in Spokane, the plan is for productivity to be scaled back, at least temporarily, to something like 25%. How quickly should veterans and clinicians in Walla Walla expect that to go back to normal, and what's being done in the meantime to mitigate that?
Great question again. With the deployment of any electronic health record or new technology, there's always a reduction, I shouldn't say always, most times a reduction in productivity. We recognize that will occur. In an ordinary circumstance, what we see is a productivity increase back to the levels before the deployment after about 3 or so months, and we're hopeful to be able to hit that. We've talked to everyone as part of the training. They understand that for a little bit of time, there's going to be some differences between what they're used to and what we're deploying, and those differences may result in some inefficiencies, but certainly will impact productivity. So you have to understand that will occur. but we're looking for that to bounce back. See how excited I get about EHR? We're looking for that to bounce back in 3 or so months as we continue to deploy, continue to train, and continue to get everyone familiar with the system.
So you said maybe about 3 months to see restoration of productivity.
That's what happens generally.
Generally.
I don't want to pinpoint it and say it absolutely will be. You'll call me and say 90 days. Have we hit that target? But what I'm looking at is what ordinarily happens in these deployments and what we've seen in our productivity numbers in the past.
So now about nearly a year and a half after go live in Spokane, has productivity returned to normal?
It has.
Okay.
Well, pre-pandemic. So what we've seen now, you have to remember again, the pandemic occurred and the challenges of COVID were being dealt with by the medical center there at the same time we're deploying. But now if we look at the productivity trends, it's back up to where it was prior to the pandemic.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Adam.
Adam Patterson, CIO Media. Thank you so much for taking this today. This one might be a bit more in the weeds, but I'm curious. It sounds like VBA has been working to increasingly automate the verification for various medical conditions starting this quarter, infusing the health information and the digitized records with their claims process. And it looks like you're aiming for a goal of about 4 new algorithms or new verifications or automations per quarter. Is there any indication of what conditions will be prioritized, especially Q2 or going forward for the remainder of this year?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I just want to say that shortly before I arrived in Spokane on my first visit, 2 Minnesotans preceded me. One was named Suggs, and one was named Holmgren. So I don't know what you're going to bring to Gonzaga, but we Minnesotans are quite proud of those 2 young basketball players. It's not that we're launching 4 new algorithms per quarter, as you said, but rather we're going to be trying to add 4 new conditions per quarter, right? So we started, as Rob Reynolds briefed you all, in I think it was December, or we started with hypertension, which is not only straightforward, but a fairly common condition for which veterans file claims. We can get you the target conditions per quarter, I think, but the way to think about it, and this is probably a question I should have asked that I have not asked, but to think about it, we're working down from the most common conditions a vet files a claim for. So that's why we started with hypertension. Then we'll work down through others. I don't know where we are in this quarter, but we'll get to the specific list. I hope that's mildly responsive to the question.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Jory.
Good afternoon. Thanks
Hi.
again for doing this press conference. Question on EHR. Understand the Walla Walla rollout is going to go ahead as planned still. What's the update or the status of the Columbus rollout as well? Is that still going to go forward as planned?
In a word, yes. It's scheduled to go live on April 30th. And we're still planning at the same time we're doing all the planning for Walla Walla Go Live. We're continuing to engage with Columbus, as you might expect, so that they're ready to go live at the end of April.
And then to pivot over to the RAISE Act, a number of VA HR officials told the House VA committee, I believe last week, that the RAISE Act was probably a first step in terms of raising the pay caps for healthcare professionals at the VA. I think that first step is physician's assistants as well as registered nurses.
Yes.
Can you describe in a sense what maybe subsequent steps might look like in terms of pay flexibilities for VA healthcare?
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. So look, there's a lot of interesting things that we're talking to Congress about. One is, for example, retention or relocation bonuses. Those are capped in statute. And you can imagine in a very dynamic, tight labor market like the one we're in, particularly for healthcare professionals, that a cap like that puts us at a competitive disadvantage. So that would be one of the things we'd look for some relief on. Second, we also, because of wage and grade requirements, we have med center directors, so CEOs of our hospitals. We got 170 of them. They're capped at wage levels below surely what they could get in the private market, but also oftentimes below what some of their most highly paid clinicians are earning. Third, our physicians themselves are also capped. Now, there's a lot of reasons physicians come to work for us, and we're super proud of our physicians, including the terrific opportunities they have to train new docs. We train somewhere around 70% of all new docs, including amazing opportunities to work in a fully integrated health system where we can conduct very interesting research, as we are now, as we've talked about in this room, on long COVID. But when our docs are capped, again, in a very dynamic market, this is something that we should just not be laboring under if we want VA to be competitive. So that's third. Fourth, we have within VA some unnecessary wage and grade differentials. So one of the great gems of the VA system are vet centers. These are storefront, almost retail mental health care professional organizations. You're a combat vet, you're a survivor of military sexual trauma, you're grieving a family member. You come in, you get care, no questions asked. A therapist there tops out at a GS-11. Somebody doing the same thing in a VA medical center is a GS-12. So naturally, there's a lot of progression from vet centers to med centers. The question we need to ask ourselves is that right? Or is there some regularization across the VA system that we ought to be doing? So those are 4 examples of the things we'll be looking at, but we'll be more than happy to make sure that we send you our fact sheet from our human infrastructure investment plan that we rolled out in January in Charleston.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Are there any other questions in the room? All right, we'll turn to our virtual media now. We'll go to Quill Lawrence first.
Oh, I don't think you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you, Quill. Everybody here is wondering why you get to stay at home and everybody else came in. But anyway, go ahead.
I'll come as soon as I can. Thanks so much. Let me just channel some of the questions that I'm already getting from caregivers and clinicians. I will remove the salty language in their comments about the caregiver decision. But can you shed a little bit more light on what went wrong? These clinicians are talking about having had to deliver this news for months and months. The caregivers have been through what they are calling an ordeal, thinking that they were going to get cut off the program. Can you tell us what went wrong? I had been told in the past by VA that this was a congressionally mandated sort of system that you were applying. So how easily can that be changed? And then a couple of follow-ups. Is this going to affect the rate of rejection for Vietnam, Korea, World War II vets? Do you expect changes in that also? Because that rejection rate has been very high. And how can it not delay the admission of these older veterans who've already been waiting so long?
Yeah, thanks very much, Quill. And I'll let Donald get into some of the programmatic differences, questions there at the end. But let me just start by saying to you that we appreciate your reporting on this, to the clinicians whom you're in touch with, that we very much appreciate their leadership on this, and to the caregivers who we fundamentally see as a key part of our care team for veterans. I think as Meg said to you, and as I said in last month's press conference, we anticipated a rate of around a third of legacy participants would be found to not qualify for continuation of the program. As we've watched this progress over the course of these months of looking at the legacy cases, it's a much higher number than that. And I think consistent with being a learning organization where we hear from our professionals and we hear from our patients and our customers, in this case our veterans and their caregivers, that something, there may be bug here, that this is not designed that such a large percentage of the legacy participants would be found to not qualify. So faced with that data, we asked ourselves, I think, the question that leaders of good organizations should ask themselves, which is there something that we need to take a closer look at? And I can both understand the salty language that you may be getting, and we also understand the great frustration that we've been hearing from veterans and their caregivers and from organizations associated with both. And we thought it was obviously the wise thing to do to make sure that the decisions we've taken to date as it relates to the regulatory framework of the program are consistent with the intent of Congress and consistent with President Biden's demands of us that we uphold our sacred obligation to veterans, especially when you see, as we do, caregivers being a fundamental part of the care team for our veterans. But Donald, let me leave to you some of the follow-on questions on that. I hope I didn't screw anything.
No, Mr. Secretary, you did. That's spot on. And thanks for the question. And again, I want to reiterate the Secretary's thanks for all of your great reporting on these issues. As I mentioned at the top, we do plan on continuing to be prepared to make sure we can expand the program in October. I believe one of your questions, Quill, was how can we achieve that? How can we make sure that veterans will be allowed in the program when we're taking a step back and re-examining the criteria for our legacy reassessments and for the program as a whole? And it's a terrific question, and we've talked a lot about that. We believe that we have the framework in place already to examine those applications while at the same time stepping back on our legacy reassessment. So we'll continue to process the applications. The veterans, the caregivers that are anticipating the October expansion date, as I mentioned, should continue to anticipate we'll be ready for expansion in October.
Is there any chance that this program would become a VBA, an entitlement, a benefit, as opposed to a VHA?
That's a great question as well. And I don't know if I said at the top, one of the things that we are doing is examining how we can be most efficient here at VA. And we have tools available to us throughout VA in order to process our veterans' needs. And some of those, Quill, you're right, are at VBA. And so we will be taking the time to examine how to use the tools that we have here at VA to create efficiencies in this program so that it can deliver as intended.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Well, I think that concludes today's press conference. There's no further questions virtually, so thank you, gentlemen, for taking questions from our press.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes, you may, sir.
Look, I just want to say this, and I'll say it publicly, and maybe it's because I'm a schmaltz, but you see now getting to spend some time with Donald, why we feel so blessed to have him as the Deputy Secretary here at VA. Not only a veteran himself and an experienced manager of big organizations, great lawyer, committed public servant, but also somebody who's willing to take on really hard challenges. You saw him as the lead briefer here on 2 issues that he's leading on, 2 of the most innovative things we're doing at VA, which also means 2 of the most difficult things we're doing at VA, which is the HRM and the Caregivers program. So Donald, thank you very much, man.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thanks guys, thanks for coming by. Appreciate you.
Thank you, everybody. See you next month.